Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Wendell McCollum, the proud Associate Superintendent of the Michigan City Area Schools. And I would like to welcome you to the 26th Annual Martin Luther King Jr. Community Program. Today, we are recognizing 26 years of Northwest Indiana communities coming together to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today is our first virtual MLK event. Like many of you, we had to pivot during this pandemic. The 2021 theme is Working Together, Building Harmony. As we take the time this morning to celebrate and honor Dr. King, I'm reminded by his words as they relate to our country's current situation. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Thomas King, Chancellor of Purdue University Northwest, who will provide opening remarks. Dr. Thomas King has been Chancellor of Purdue University Northwest since its formation in July 2016. Having successfully led the complicated merger of the two Purdue system campuses in Hammond and Westville, as Chancellor, Dr. King's leadership centers on positioning the university as a key player in Northwest Indiana's economic development, educational advancement, environmental sustainability, and cultural enhancement. He is committed to cultivating, supporting, and strengthening leadership among students, faculty, and staff. An accountant by training and supporter of civic engagement and the arts by design, Dr. King seeks to equip students with the training for successful careers, as well as a deep appreciation for the responsibilities of citizenship. At this time, once again, I'd like to introduce Dr. Thomas King.
Welcome, everybody, to Purdue University Northwest. It's always a pleasure for PNW to host this event. It truly is unfortunate that it must be virtual this year, but everything is different, everything is changing. We are in a world that in many ways is so different than ever before. However, I would say, although this is our 26th year, it's more than 52 years since Martin Luther King was assassinated. He was a wonderful man with a wonderful message, and it's important for us to understand today, particularly his message, because although he's been gone these 50-plus years, in many ways we still view the world with some of the same problems that we had back in 1968. So as you're thinking about our program today, and as you're embracing the thoughts and words of Martin Luther King, please think about how we can continue his message as what we practice, not just what we think. Here at Purdue University Northwest, we're one of the most diverse universities in the state. That's not why we host this event. That's not why we're concerned with social justice. That's not why we've been fighting this pandemic, but rather it is our values and what we as a university have pride in, which is acceptance and tolerance. So please think about what we must do as we go forward. We have a very divided country, but yet we still move forward, and we move forward because of people like you who are willing to work hard for all of what Martin Luther King stood for. So thank you all so much for being part of this presentation, and thank you from PNW.
Thank you, Chancellor King, for your cordial welcome. Our next voice you will hear will be Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod, President and CEO of Northwest Indiana Urban League. Dr. Allen McLeod is a certified in civility in the workplace and cultural competency civility trainer. Dr. Allen McLeod will be followed by Dr. Karen Bishop Morris, who will be delivering the keynote presentation. Dr. Karen Bishop Morris is an associate professor of English at Purdue University Northwest, where she has also served as interim dean of the Honors College, chair department of the English department, director of the first year writing, and director of the University Writing Center. She received her PhD in English rhetoric and composition from Purdue University in 2002. Since then, she has served as a board member, a fundraising strategist for many national and local nonprofit organizations, including Girls Right Now, vice chair, New York, the multiple Melima Research Foundation, Strategic Alliances Midwest Region, Careers Through Culinary Arts Program, Executive Director, Chicago, and Share Foundation with the Handicapped Director of Development, Rolling Prairie. On the academic side, her energy is focused on building innovative programs, implementing high-impact practices for first-generation students, and strengthening connections between higher education and its various stakeholders. She has been recognized for her influence around issues of engagement, inclusion, and philanthropy, and is frequently invited as a speaker. Her current services include membership on the 2021 Purdue Equity Task Force, St. Catherine Hospital Board, Laney Fluin Charities Pink Tie Committee, and as a reviewer for the Susan G. Komen Foundation of Chicago. After hearing from Dr. Bishop, Dr. Allen McLeod will again provide an additional music selection.
Thank you, Dr. McCullum, for that introduction to Chancellor Keon, the listening audience, the Purdue faculty, administrators, staff, and students. I bring you greetings from the Urban League of Northwest Indiana, where I serve as the president and CEO. I'm so glad to come before you today to provide you with a solo. The song is entitled, "You Can Count on Me." And as we recognize and celebrate the efforts in Dr. Martin Luther King and all that he did, remember that he had a dream. And I know that you all have a dream, and we need to keep that dream in our forefront and in the presence. So you can count on me, and we can count on each other. Count on me through thick and thin, a friendship that will never end. When you are weak, I'll be strong, helping you to carry on. Call on me and I'll be there. Don't be afraid. Please believe me when I say, count on. I can see it's hurting you. I can feel your pain. It's hard to see the sunshine through the rain. I know sometimes it seems as if it's never gonna end, but you'll get through it. Just don't give in. Count on me through thick and thin, friendships that will never end. When you are weak, I'll be strong, helping you to carry on. Call on me and I'll be there. Don't be afraid. Please believe me when I say you can count on me. You can count on me. Oh, I know sometimes it seems as if You're standing all alone, but you'll get through it. Just don't give in. Count on me through thick and thin. Friendships that will never end. When you are weak, I'll be strong, helping you to carry on. Call on me and I'll be there. Don't be afraid. Please believe me when I say you can count on. There's a place inside of all of us where our faith and love begins. You should reach to find the truth in the answers that you need. I know in life it makes you feel it's much harder than it really is, but you'll get through it. Just don't give in. Count on me through thick and thin, a friendship that will never end. When you are weak, I'll be strong, helping you to carry on. Call on me, I'll be there. Don't you be afraid. Please believe me when I say you can count on me. You can count on me.
Thank you, Dr. McCollum, for such a generous introduction. Chancellor Keon, thank you to Purdue University Northwest for hosting this 26th annual MLK Day celebration. And a special dose of gratitude goes to the indefatigable organizing committee. Thank you for everything you do all year long to ensure that this program happens. Much grace and gratitude to you, Sister Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod, for lifting us up in song and in deed, as you do so tirelessly on the front lines leading the Urban League of Northwest Indiana. And to everyone behind the scenes, your work may be invisible, but your worth is immeasurable. The thing that is hurting us most is the continued existence of segregation and discrimination. And we think we're rendering a great service to our nation. For this is not a struggle for ourselves alone, it is a struggle to save the soul of America. Those are the words of Martin Luther King Jr. 60 years ago. 60 years ago, and yet racialized violence against African American men continues unchecked. Mass incarceration of Black and brown men continues unchecked. The Latino civil rights movement continues facing the same issues around labor, fair wages, and immigration that can be traced back to 1903, when the first Japanese-Mexican Labor Association was formed in California. We are living in a time where headlines about Muslim bans barely raise an eyebrow for some, and discriminatory voter practices, including voter suppression, continues in Georgia and elsewhere, unchecked. The gender wage gap is alive and well. Women still earn only 81 cents for every dollar earned by men in 2020. In 2019, collectively, more than 55 million working full-time women earned $545 billion less than their male counterparts. 27% of all S&P corporate board seats are occupied by women, but of those, only 4.6% by women of color. The thing that is hurting us most is the continued existence of segregation and discrimination. The committee asked me today to speak on a theme, working together, building harmony. If we are to work together in a club, in a student organization, on a work team, a nonprofit, a church, an institution, working together implies, it demands that we know something about one another. We have to be willing to invest the time to understand the other. What are their values, drivers, goals? And we have a responsibility to know these same things about ourselves. What are our core values? Where do they come from? What are our drivers? What are our goals? This process of getting to know is the process of building empathy. According to Dr. Helen Reese, a medical doctor who studies the science of empathy at Harvard, quote, empathy plays a critical interpersonal and societal role, enabling sharing of experiences, needs, and desires between individuals and providing an emotional bridge that promotes pro-social behavior. She goes on to say that we cannot move, quote, in the direction of a more empathic society and a more compassionate world unless we are working to enhance our native capacities to empathize. It is critical to strengthening individual, community, national, and international bonds. We can extrapolate from the science of empathy to improve not only better clinical outcomes, but better societal outcomes. Simply put, I believe a more empathic society produces a more equitable society. And there's no better exemplar on the impact of empathy as a driver for equity than the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Who was this man, Michael King Jr., born on January 15, 1929? Michael King Jr., whose father, Michael King Sr., a pastor at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church, traveled to Germany in 1934 and became inspired by the teachings of the Protestant Reformation leader Martin Luther. As a result of that inspiration, Sr. changed his own name, as well as the name of his 5-year-old son. What can we learn from a young Martin Luther King Jr., who earned a divinity degree and then went on to earn a PhD from Boston University in 1955? Why are we celebrating a man who was jailed 29 times? Who is this man for whom a federal holiday has been created? Did you know there are only 2 federal holidays honoring the birthdays of Americans? One is MLK, the other is George Washington. All over the nation today, on the 3rd Monday in January, we are remembering, reciting, preaching, and teaching I Have a Dream, or Letters from Birmingham Jail, because both of those pieces have bubbled up to the level of the American consciousness for the historical markers that they are. Don't get me wrong, that speech and that letter are important, very important. I worry, however, that we have grown desensitized to the legacy of Dr. King. So today, I invite us to really educate ourselves about what made the man, the power of his legacy, and why the model still stands today as a model for working together, building harmony. I'm inviting you to join me in holding up a magnifying glass to the papers and images of Dr. Martin Luther King to reveal the skills of leadership and movement making and transformation that are necessary to save the soul of America and perhaps save ourselves in the process. This slide is a list of the 7 volumes that exist of a planned 14-volume set of the papers of Dr. Martin Luther King. It's an extraordinary collaboration that's housed at Stanford University and in collaboration with the King Center in Atlanta and hundreds, if not thousands, of other benefactors and contributors. The papers are a visual reminder of King's legacy. The first thing, though, that strikes me about the theme and the man is the word working. Martin Luther King Jr. was a working man, all the time, with all the people, everywhere, nonstop, and he worked smart, and he wrote it all down. The reason we have this invaluable collection of papers is due to the fact that he was a prolific communicator. He spoke to audiences all over the world and from every walk of life, and he wrote nearly every day of his life. If Twitter had been a thing, he would have been matchless. There are a number of things inherent in this point. One, King was well informed about politics, religion, economics, the classics, you name it. He was also very skilled at written and oral argumentation. He knew how to advocate, when to advocate, for and to whom to advocate, and he easily deployed rhetorical skills. He was a master of delivery and persuasion. He sharpened his toolkit not by delegating, but by doing. He walked the walk that he talked. Each volume of the King's papers spans a particular period and begins with a chronology. I'm going to show you that chronology. It's basically an annotated calendar, and I'm choosing just a few pages from the 1959 December 1960 collection. It's actually volume 5. I'm choosing that period deliberately because of the parallels in terms of socio-political climate. There were lots of protests happening. It was the escalating movement of voting rights. And it was also the year that King traveled to India that eventually inspired his principles of nonviolence. This particular volume, volume 5, begins with a quote attributed to King and A. Philip Randolph. "A civil rights crisis rocks the nation. We are on the threshold of a new decade in which the masses of Negro people are coming onto the stage of history and demanding their freedom now." 60 years later, their words ring true. A civil rights crisis rocks the nation. Just as the 2020 election, the murders of Jason Blake, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and hundreds of other African-American men and women, the Black Lives Matter protests, the challenging and in some cases crumbling of American institutions, just as all those events mark an inflection point in today's history, the end of the 1950s and the beginning of the 60s was similarly pivotal in King's career. First, by the end of the 50s, we see the growing unrest and the protests throughout the South. But we also begin to get a sense of the growing effectiveness and sophistication of the organizations King led and of the movement. Secondly, 1959 was the year that King traveled to India to meet with Prime Minister Nehru and other associates of Mahatma Gandhi. I'll say and show more about that trip later, but upon his return to Montgomery, King decided to reorganize his Southern Christian Leadership Conference and relocate to Atlanta. King was arrested in October of that year after participating in a sit-in protest in Atlanta. His resulting imprisonment led presidential candidate John F. Kennedy to phone Coretta, his wife, a move that many credit for providing the slim margin of victory in the close election of 1960. I would be remiss not to point out that MLK never officially endorsed JFK. However, there is overwhelming evidence of their mutual respect and connection through correspondence, which we'll see a bit later. So here's where we are. Protests and cries for democracy, reorganizing institutional structures, pivotal high-stakes presidential campaign, global calls for peace. Sound familiar? A lot going on for King, as evidenced by these artifacts. So here's one of the first pages from that 1959 diary. Not that I expect you to read it, but what I would like to point out is that there is literally an entry for almost every single day of every several week of the year. Usually multiple entries on a day, and those entries involve all sorts of tasks, from speaking to writing to lobbying to preaching to teaching, everything at once, and oftentimes in multiple cities in a given day. On January 30th, there's an interesting entry. He arrives in Gary, Indiana after midnight. He missed his scheduled appearance at a mass meeting sponsored by the Fair Share organization. Now, I'm almost sure that there had to be snow involved because it wasn't like him to miss meetings. But he met with the officers anyway in the middle of the night and then headed out the very next morning to Detroit to meet with the leadership of the United Auto Workers. A dozen more stops and speeches and meetings from January 30th through February 3rd when he finally departs for India. It's a 6-week trip, but not before a half dozen more appearances in Philadelphia, a stop in London to have dinner with Richard Wright, a stop in Switzerland, and then finally on to Bombay. In this chronology, we also see that while in India, King met again with everyone. He had meetings with the untouchables of India, the lowest of the low. He also met with Rabindranath Tagore, a Bengali poet and philosopher. And if that is not a name familiar to you, just know that Tagore is actually credited with influencing John Dewey, and especially John Dewey's ideas on education reform. So ideas like play, the importance of play and experiential learning, that was the origin. So my point is this: King was not an intellectual lightweight. He held his own with the foremost philosophers and thought leaders of the day. All right, so much for his day job. Now let's move on to his side hustle, teaching a course at Morehouse College. His work looked something like this. Actually, this is a letter from President Benjamin Mays of Morehouse College. And in the letter, King is actually accepting his offer to teach a senior seminar in social philosophy. And he's agreeing to teach this course for an academic year for the sum of $1,500, but he's reminding President Mays that he's going to need 4 Tuesdays off for other commitments. These next few slides, no one could read these. These are actually in King's own hand. These are outlines of his lecture notes for that social philosophy seminar. And these notes are actually held at the Atlanta University Center in the Robert Woodruff Library archives. The notes are all written on just plain old line notebook paper. But for King, I gotta say, I'm a little embarrassed with the level of detail that he took in preparing these notes. In this particular set, he's introducing his students to fundamental ideas on several well-known theologians and philosophers, including Plato and Aristotle and Rousseau. He begins his lecture this way, which means I'm really gonna up my game next week. Quote, "We are experiencing cold and whistling winds of despair in a world packed with turbulence. While Russia is poisoning the physical atmosphere with megaton bombs, America is still poisoning the moral atmosphere with racial discrimination. We must invest our energies not in a hysterical anti-communism, but in a positive democratic dynamism, which will lift the economic, social, and political standard of the world." And then a deep dive into Augustine and Aquinas. He tosses in a little Machiavelli for good measure. And then he dives into this really exciting wholesale criticism of Aristotle. For being too enamored of an intellectual life, he thinks that Aristotle doesn't put enough value on the dignity of labor, which to me was a little ironic considering the context of this very highly intellectual lecture. But so it goes. I mean, to be a fly on the wall in that seminar. So I think we can agree that King was a hard worker, but lest we get too far afield, let's focus on the together part of our theme for today. So this certainly applies to Dr. King. He worked with everyone, every race, religion, creed, economic status. You've heard the quote, maybe even said it a few times yourself, "Until all of us are free, none of us are free." He meant that. Dr. King's lived experience was certainly that of a Black man from the South, but his perspective was far-reaching, diverse, and inclusive. Whites marched with King. Jews marched with King. Support for his movement crossed the color lines, in part, and we know this from the papers, because of a recognition of injustice against Black Americans, sure, that was part of it, but also because of a realization of the cultural and economic handicap that all Americans endure in the face of poverty. Dr. King's anti-poverty work, or the Poor People's Campaign, included folks like Reyes Tijerina of New Mexico, who was a leader of land grant rights effort in the Chicano movement. In what was seen as an attempt to thwart the campaign, Tijerina was arrested hours before he was supposed to leave to meet King at the March on Washington. Stanley Levinson was a key advisor to King. Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, another prominent Chicano movement advocate who led a caravan from Colorado to DC for the March on Washington. Bert Corona, Jose Angel Gutierrez, white coal miners from Kentucky, white coal miners from West Virginia, Native American activists, Puerto Rican activists. You get the picture, but let's not miss the point. These representatives formed the Committee of 100, and their main activity was to produce a strategy that got them in front of Congress and agency leaders. So they met with everyone from the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Interior. And speaking of the Department of Interior, I'm sure King would be thrilled about this latest appointment of Deb Haaland as the secretary. These folks were not all African Americans fighting for only African Americans. So much of the legislation of the 1960s and even today is rooted in the philosophy and principles and organizing first modeled by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and carried out by his Rainbow Coalition, which, by the way, is the name of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who served under King, his movement today, the Rainbow Push Coalition. The Poor People's Campaign had very specific outcomes. They were looking for meaningful jobs at a living wage. They were looking for access to capital for poor people and minorities to start businesses. And good things came of it. The Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968, for example, passed under Lyndon B. Johnson on the heels of so many riots sweeping the nation, and unfortunately also the assassination of King. But the intention was to construct and or rehabilitate 26 million public housing units, 6 million designated for low and moderate income families. Talking about King and the intentional way that he worked together is one thing, but pictures are worth 1,000 words. So this next series of images is actually meant to demonstrate some of this inclusivity that I've talked about. And the vast majority of those images were shot by this photographer, Flip Schulke, who became a very dear friend of King. Flip Schulke was one of America's premier photojournalists. He had a close friendship with King. He's best known for chronicling the civil rights, but you'll notice him pictured here in diving gear. That's because he also developed cameras and special lenses for underwater photography, and he's also widely known for basically documenting the US space program during the same time. So Schulke met King. This is one of the first images believed to have been taken by Schulke of King at a black rally at a church, at a black church at a rally in Miami. But this is actually King greeting parishioners outside of his church in Atlanta, Ebenezer. This next image is C.T. Vivian, and if that name rings a bell, it's because we lost this freedom fighter and Martin Luther King supporter this year on the same day that we lost Congressman John Lewis in 2020. In this photo, C.T. Vivian is the man standing and teaching, and he's actually training a class in nonviolence and preparing folks for a march. Now, it's rumored that a lot of folks after this photo approached King. They didn't want Schulke, as a white man, to be chronicling and capturing and documenting the civil rights movement. However, if you look closely at this picture, you'll see some black folks, but you'll see a whole lot of white folks. And you'll see, I'm pretty sure, what our Catholic nuns inhabit and just about everybody in between. King repudiated this resistance to Schulke immediately and loudly. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing badly, basically, I don't care if he's yellow with purple polka dots, he stays. This is another photo of King enlisting Pope. This is the General Assembly of the National Convening of Churches, and this was in December 1957. After King's assassination, Coretta Scott King personally invited Schulke to bring his camera to the funeral. Here he captured Robert Kennedy and his wife Ethel, paying their respects to the King family in the King bedroom. So some takeaways from this Together section. King took influence and inspiration from interesting, intelligent, diverse groups of people. You've heard this, right? Take a look at the folks you surround yourself with. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Take a page out of King's notebook. It takes courage to be with people that don't look like you, don't think like you, that are willing to resist you and challenge you rather than repeat and reinscribe your thinking. So, building our third section. On the subject of building, again, study King, and you will discover an exhausting amount of material on building organizations, building teams, building movements with national and global impacts. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus on just two. King spent much of 1957 and 1958 building on the momentum of the Montgomery bus boycott and establishing his Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The SCLC, founded by King, is still in existence today. They actually have 17 affiliates and about 57 chapters. And to learn more about their work, I invite you to check them out at nationalsclc.org. Not without its challenges, though, during this period. The SCLC continued to grow in spite of racial unrest and resistance. Ultimately, it was the power of King's oratory that garnered him first audiences and then powerful alliances. These next photographs are images that depict that. This one taken at Mills College, an all-women's college in Oakland, California. The student body there invited King to come and talk to them about how to take a realistic look at race relations. This was a common sign. This is actually in Alabama. This is propaganda. It's King found himself fighting communism throughout the civil rights movement. And even though he was sympathetic to communism's core concern with social justice, he definitely defied communism and complained that, quote, "It's cold atheism wrapped in the garments of materialism. Communism provides no place for God or Christ." Here's King working together, this time in Ghana, West Africa, with the Prime Minister. This is King at his very first White House meeting in 1958 with President Eisenhower. And here's King with another delegation of Gandhi associates in Montgomery, Alabama. They've actually come to visit him. Again, I've chosen these images to capture the breadth and the depth of the movement, as King as a symbol of the movement. So often we see him marching or being arrested or being photographed with his wife and family or closest allies, but I felt it important for you to get a glimpse of the man through his associates by way of the impact he made at home and abroad, in church basements, pool halls, and the West Wing. I think, too, there is another lesson here to take away from King's life, and that is for all his recognitions and rewards, including a Nobel Peace Prize, great leadership takes empathy and courage, but you can count on having some setbacks. In this photograph, King is pictured with Arthur Spingarn, who was, again, a supporter throughout the entire civil rights movement. In fact, Arthur Spingarn at one point actually served as president of the NAACP. If you look closely at this photograph, just above King's left breast pocket, you'll see there is an instrument sticking out of his chest. It's a letter opener. He was stabbed in this photo. This was almost a dozen years before his actual assassination. But this was an attempt on his life. It was a woman. It was a book signing. She approached the table, asked if he was King. He replied yes, and she said, "Great, I've been looking for you for 5 years," and plunged the letter opener into his chest, just millimeters away from his aorta. Doctors, after he endured hours of emergency surgery, said if he had just sneezed, that letter opener would have punctured his chest and we would have lost him. Builder of relationships. So this is a letter from Dr. King to James Baldwin, and I'm just going to read a tiny bit of it. He says, "Dear James, please excuse me for taking the prerogative of addressing you by your first name, but I feel just that close to you. I have just finished reading Nobody Knows My Name, and I simply want to thank you for it. The collection of essays and lectures will certainly go down as a classic on the meaning of the social revolution," on and on. Okay, I don't know about you, but I am blown away by this. When is the last time that you read or watched or heard of some performance, something phenomenal, and you put pen to paper and thanked a rank stranger for writing or performing or singing it? He goes on to thank Baldwin for an article that Baldwin wrote in Harper's, and then to wish him many more successful days as a writer. He says, in the end, You're not only a great Negro writer, you are just a great writer, and you make us all proud. Imagine that. This next letter is a letter to Sammy Davis Jr. So amidst all this traveling and lecturing and preaching, he's writing all the time. He's thanking Sammy here for organizing a benefit, the proceeds which benefited the SCLC. This tribute was a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. It was at Carnegie Hall, and it raised about $22,000, which in today's dollars is about $175,000, $180,000. Not too shabby. Here is a letter from King to JFK. It's actually a telegram. He corresponded with JFK and also with Robert Kennedy frequently. This telegram, written the 17th of December, 1961, urges JFK to issue a second Emancipation Proclamation by executive order to free all Negroes from second-class citizenship. He presses for America to defend democratic principles and to press for equal rights of Americans as vigorously as it does in aiding foreign nations with military aid. He also finally calls for freedom for the release of hundreds of protesters arrested in Albany. Well, King was about results. Result number one, 7-hour closed-door negotiations with the Albany movement and the Albany City Commission led to the release of those protesters. Result number two, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy phoned the Albany mayor to congratulate him on reaching a peaceful settlement under difficult conditions. Result number three, Congress passed a very strong and expansive foreign aid program, but it was hundreds and hundreds of $millions shy of what folks expected to be earmarked for military aid to foreign nations. There is a letter also in the King papers from a very famous writer by the name of Harold Corlander. And if that name rings a bell, it's because Corlander is the author of the 1967 novel, The African, and he claimed that actually Alex Haley plagiarized parts of The African for Roots. At any rate, Corlander reaches out blind to King, and he's criticizing him about the freedom rides. And his criticism is too much publicity. Your Madison Avenue publicity, as a direct quote, has an intent of stirring things up, but the chances for strategic loss, Corlander writes, are as great as the chances of tactical gain. Again, King and the movement were covered by all the top-tier outlets, New York Times, Life magazine, Look magazine, but Corlander is criticizing the splash, although he sends a donation along with his letter anyway. So if you're asking yourself, what can you do? Here's some advice from King. Quote, public relations is a very necessary part of any protest of civil disobedience. The main objective is to bring moral pressure to bear upon an unjust system or a particularly unjust law. The world seldom believes horror stories of history until they are documented via mass media. Certainly, there would not have been sufficient pressure to warrant a ruling by the ICC had not this situation been so well publicized. Here, King is referring to the Interstate Commerce Commission, who had relented to pressure by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and passed regulations enforcing a ban on segregated interstate travel. King ends the letter this way, quote, may I refer you to a new book by James Baldwin, Nobody Knows My Name? It may provide some additional insights into the racial situation from the viewpoint of the oppressed. This very last letter is actually a letter to a Ball State student. David Johnson is a senior at Ball State Teachers College in Muncie, and he reaches out to King for suggestions for leading an integration campaign on his campus. King writes back praising Johnson for wanting to take steps to integrate the campus, and we learn from the King papers that Ball State was already officially desegregated, but Black students who lived off campus could only live in the Black section of Muncie, 6 to 12 miles away from campus. Johnson learned a lot from King. He organized sit-ins, he met with veterans, he formed an interracial student group. Johnson's group was so strong that it put enough pressure on the administration and local restaurants to comply with their demands on a number of issues. They refuted the administration's claims about separate housing by finding white families willing to house Black students and white students willing to have a Black roommate. In true King fashion, he ends the letter by referring the student to write to the president of Yale University next. That administration has had a lot of progress on these issues on campus. And last but not least, our end goal, building harmony. In his 1958 annual report, King, upon reviewing his activities for the Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, said it was a really difficult year. He talked about all of the threats he had faced personally, all of the attacks, the intimidation, the physical violence, and he says that, you know, in spite of it all, I'm never going to stand down. And I'm also never going to be allowed any other man to drag me so low as to hate him. Above all, I will never become bitter. So the lesson here, if harmony is your goal, be harmonious. It was time now for a pilgrimage. King needed some respite, but also, again, this was definitely a working trip. This map of India shows how he crisscrossed the country and really threw himself into the learning that informed the principles of nonviolence. This next slide, this is the Kings arriving at New Delhi's airport, greeted by Gandhi associates. This next slide, the Kings are laying a wreath on Gandhi's samadhi, which is basically the site of his cremation. Next, we see the Kings pictured at the home of J.B. Kripalani, who was an Indian independence leader. India had a profound effect on King. He slept in Gandhi's house in Bombay. He noted that India was one of the few places in the world where you could see the setting of the sun and the emergence of the moon simultaneously. The spiritual significance was deep and serious for King. He wrote about principles of nonviolent resistance. He wrote about and compared colonialism and imperialism in Africa, Asia, and America. King, if he were alive today, would no doubt be in solidarity with the farmers' protests in India that are happening now. He wrote about the airtight cage of poverty that afflicted African Americans in rat-infested, unendurable slums. He thought the plight of African Americans no different than that of the untouchables in India. He said he himself was an untouchable and that every Negro in the US is an untouchable. How will we ever work together and build harmony, truly, until all of our brothers and sisters can live as equals? Why is it so difficult? We see the suffering, and in most cases, we know right from wrong. But knowing is not enough. It takes empathy to get to equity, and empathy takes effort. Consider this. According to a recent APA study, folks often avoid empathy because of the mental effort involved. In this study, participants were asked to pull from one of two decks of cards. The first deck, if you pulled a card, simply describe the physical characteristics of the image on the card. That's it, just description. If you pulled from the second or the empathy deck, concentrate on the feeling being emoted by the image in the card. You don't need to follow up with a financial contribution. You don't need to engage with the immigrant or the refugee or the homeless child. Just sit with those feelings and think about what they might be feeling. 35% of the participants avoided the empathy deck altogether, even when the image was of something joyful. They did not want to take the time to feel what others were feeling. Okay, so it's hard, but it's not impossible. Exhibit A, California's board diversity law. Recall near the beginning of this talk, I shared statistics about the depressingly low percentage of women of color serving on corporate boards. The picture is slightly rosier for all women, 27% in 2019, up from 17% in 2012. But here's where the hope lies. In 2019, California legislation affecting 700 public companies mandated that every one of those companies with a principal executive office in California, no matter where they're incorporated, where else they do business, must have a representative number of women serving on their board of directors. That's huge, but it's not rocket science. Those lobbying for this identified key issues that I'm sure will resonate with each and every one of you. If you can point to a lack of equity, in some aspect of your pipeline. Number one, a failure to prioritize diversity in recruiting efforts. In the words of Nike, just do it. Just make it a priority. Make the decisions. Number two, limitations on traditional candidate pipelines. Again, we have control of that. Rewrite the rules. Just do it. Number three, low annual board turnover. So set different term limits or expand the number of seats. This was a king move, this California legislation. Exhibit B, Virgin Records. Richard Branson, founder and CEO of Virgin Records, has a modern slavery statement on their website. Crafted in 2018, it's a statement of their approach as well as the steps they've taken to, quote, prevent modern slavery in their business and supply chains. They have a zero-tolerance policy against human trafficking and any untoward global labor practice. I encourage you to look it up. It's a lot of good stuff there. Code of conduct, whistleblower policy, training, ethical and equitable standards for procurement. You can do the same in your corner of the world. You can advocate. You can get in proximity, as Brian Stevenson says in Just Mercy, with the people to really understand life from their perspective. You can listen. You can love. You can forgive. You can be humane. I happen to think it's a choice. It's a choice that King made, and he committed to it wholeheartedly. Whatever your passion is, whoever the people are you are fighting for and with, make the choice to follow King's examples. Fight peacefully and respectfully, but fight for what is right. Go on record. Hold those in power accountable. Write your congressman or senator. Organize, mobilize, lobby. Be informed. Start a campaign. Write it down. Tell your stories in the media, and then tell them again to anyone and everyone who will listen. Reach out to like minds. Tell someone, you know, I like what you stand for. Emulate. Elevate. Elevate yourself and your circle. Just remember to lift as you climb. What is your march? What step will you take today to enrich the lives of others? How will you connect the dots this year, like King did, to create empathy and drive equity? What role can we count on you to play in saving the soul of America? Thank you.
Greetings to you in the audience, at home. This is a virtual platform to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all that he has done. We just heard a very inspiring tribute and historical lesson from our very own Dr. Karen Bishop Morris. We thank her so much for that. And as we move forward in this celebration, I'm here to bring a solo to you. I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League of Northwest Indiana. We provide services in education, financial literacy, and diversity and inclusion and equity programming. If you're out there and you need a scholarship, whether you live in Lake Porter or LaPorte counties, please call our office at 219-887-9621. We have scholarships that are available to you, high school graduating seniors, as well as if you are a returning adult student. Check out our website at www.ulofnwi. So as we come to a close, I'm going to sing for you, and some of you know this. It's called Lean on Me. Lean on Me was originally made by Bill Withers, and I'm sure you know this. So if you're at home, I ask you to stand up on your feet, get ready. We're about to do some movements to this song, and sing along with me. Get ready. Are you standing? We're going to move forward in making a difference in our community and in our school. You can lean on me. You can lean on the people at Purdue University Northwest, whether it's in the admissions office or the bursar's office or even the Chancellor's office. So stay tuned. Here we go. Get your hands ready. We're going to clap. Everybody clap your hands. I know you're not standing, so stand up right where you are so we can get into this movement to move our community and move our school forward. So thank you for joining us and thank you for this opportunity. If you know the song, get ready. Here we go. Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride if I have things you need to borrow, for no one can feel those of your needs that you won't show. Lean on me, come on, when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. You just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you'll understand. We all need somebody to lean on. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. What if you can find, I won't be long, somebody to lean on. Tell my brother, tell my sister. Come on, let's clap your hands. You can lean on me. Tell my brother, tell my sister. Are you clapping? Get ready, Purdue. Faculty, administrators, staff, everybody who makes up Purdue University Northwest. We are happy you can lean on us. If you need a friend, if you need a friend, you can lean on me. Just come on, my brother, come on, my sister. You can need a friend, just lean on me.
Thank you, Dr. Karen Bishop Morris, for keeping the dream front and center and very much alive. And thank you, Dr. Vanessa Allen McLeod, for your vocals as we continue to march together. This program is only possible because of our donors. Bronze donors, LaPorte County Herald-Dispatch, LaPorte County NAACP, Life Changes, Michigan City Commission on the Social Status of African American Males. Silver donors, First Source Bank, Sinai Temple, Unity Foundation of LaPorte County. Gold donors, Michigan City Human Rights Commission, Michigan City LaPorte Convention and Visitors Bureau. Premier donors, Horizon Bank, NIPSCO, NI-Source Charitable Foundations, Purdue University Northwest, Creating a Culture of Inclusion team. Thank you also to those who spearheaded putting together today's event, the MLK Committee: Amanda Bates, Susan Breichel, Judy Jacoby, Robin Cohn, Faye Moore, Jennifer Shoup, Elaine Togbe, Tyra Walker, Sandra Craig, and Laura Odom. The committee has asked that in lieu of donations of needed items collected at the in-person events held on Purdue Northwest campus in previous years. They kindly suggest making a donation to a charity or organization of your choice. I thank you for joining us to view this virtual tribute of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Please take the next 365 days to live and walk in the footsteps of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. until we can meet again in Westville and Hammond. We hope you enjoyed this virtual program, but the pandemic is not forever. We look forward to seeing you in Westville or Hammond next year to continue moving forward, building harmony. As we conclude today, please watch, reflect, and remember that we shall overcome video. The song became associated with the Civil Rights Movement from 1959, and it quickly became the movement's unofficial anthem.
There's a little song that we sing in our movement down in the South. I don't know if you've heard it, but it has become the theme song. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. Though I join hands so often with students and others behind jail bars singing it, we shall overcome. Sometimes we've had tears in our eyes when we joined together to sing it, but we still decided to sing it. We shall overcome. Oh, before this victory is won, some will have to get thrown in jail some more, but we shall overcome. Don't worry about us. Before the victory is won, some of us will lose jobs, but we shall overcome. Before the victory is won, even some will have to face physical death. But if physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children from a permanent psychological death, then nothing shall be more redemptive. We shall overcome. Before the victory is won, some will be misunderstood and called bad names and dismissed as rabble-rousers and agitators, but we shall overcome. And I'll tell you why. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. We shall overcome because the Bible is right. You shall reap what you sow. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. And with this faith, we will go out and adjourn the councils of despair and bring new light into the dark chambers of pessimism. And we will be able to rise from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope. And this will be a great America. We will be the participants in making it so. And so as I leave you this evening, I say, walk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the corner.